Welcome to the BFI. It's great to see such a big turnout. Before I tell you about what's happening with our Genius of Hitchcock project, I just want to put it in context a bit and say something about why we think Hitchcock is such a great filmmaker. For the last 77 years, the BFI has been collecting and preserving and making available to the public really one of the greatest collections of film and television in the world. And our core collection is British film. And we're very keen to use those films to inspire new filmmakers and the audiences of today, now that the BFI has a new role in, as you know, lead body for film and in funding cinema. And as part of this Olympian year, when all the other big national collections and cultural organisations were getting out their big guns, we wanted to get out ours. So if you consider the Shakespeare at the British Museum, there's Lucian Freud on at the minute at the National Portrait Gallery. There's Damien Hirst coming to, he's already there, Tate Modern. Turner is coming to the National Gallery. We felt that we wanted to look at Alfred Hitchcock as one of our greatest filmmakers. I think it's a peculiarity that we probably all know about British journalism, broadsheets in particular maybe, that we're still dominated by reviews and writing about books and theatre. And the idea of popular cinema somehow being capable of being great art at the same time as being entertaining is still a problem for some people. Shakespeare is on the national curriculum, Hitchcock is not. So we wanted to look at the fact that he made more than 20 films here in England before his fame and genius attracted him to David Selznick's attention. He went off to America to make Rebecca. Although I think even in America, Hitchcock is his sense of humour is the most English of senses of humour, and he continued to adapt lots of English novels for screenplays. And in re-examining and celebrating this great artist of cinema, we wanted to shine a spotlight on the British works and his 9 surviving silent feature films in particular. You can see how fresh and original and really how innovative he is. Even after the passage of decades, these films disclose new riches, and there's definitely an undiminished power to grip the audience. But I'd like to think for a moment about something. When Picasso painted Les Demoiselles d'Avignon in 1907, he changed the face of modern art forever. When Le Corbusier built Villa Savoye in 1925, I think it was, it changed architecture, it changed the game, it changed what happened. And Hitchcock, I think, is this category. After Psycho in particular, filmmaking can never be the same again. Like all great filmmakers, all great artists, he really did change the rules of the game. And I think like all great modernists, he self-consciously experiments with the form itself. The form here doesn't embellish the content, it creates the content, it is the meaning of the film. Now, we saw, of course, Psycho in the trailer, and Psycho, in some sense, I think is quite unusual in Hitchcock's output because you all know, he loves The Wrong Man, films about guilt and redemption, and that whole playful mixture of romance with thriller and comedy. And here, that's rather overtaken with horror elements. But I think with these other masterpieces, Vertigo and Rear Window in particular, that exploration of what is real and what is false, and the desire and pleasure in looking itself, the whole capacity that we have as the audience for voyeurism, is an exploration of the very nature of cinema, and that's what makes Psycho a great work of modern art. And who here, who's seen Psycho, hasn't stood in the shower for a moment and had at least a little moment of doubt? By the 50s, probably lots of you know better than I mean, Hitchcock was the most popular and well-known director in America, but the interest in Hitchcock as a serious film artist was really beginning. You had, of course, writers who went on to become filmmakers in the French New Wave, situating Hitchcock as a great artist. Cahiers du Cinema dedicated a whole issue to Hitchcock. And you had Andrew Sarris, who, for the older people here, will remember a sacred text that he wrote called The American Cinema, where Hitchcock was up there in that pantheon of great directors. I would say that Sight and Sound, actually, at the time, were rather snobbish and thought Hitchcock was a mere entertainer, so I don't think we got it right. But anyway, neither the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences or BAFTA ever honoured Hitchcock as Best Director, and I think we know that they're pretty short on humour. The Academy seems to like seriousness worn on its sleeve. But I do think, even though you're all applauding at the trailer, that there are still people today who have trouble with the idea of commerce and art together and don't like the idea that entertainment can be taken seriously. that there's something inimical between the two, and we definitely want to show that that's not so in our Genius of Hitchcock retrospective. I think there's another small thing that in Hitchcock's favour, not in Hitchcock's favour, is that he was serious about everything he did, but he didn't take himself seriously at all, which I think is a great thing. I think other people have trouble with that whole teasing, tongue-in-cheek approach. The lack of gravity sits ill with the idea of a great artist at work. But this was somebody who knew what he was doing. He'd been, I'm sure you know, but I'll just say, Hitchcock had been in Germany and had seen both Murnau and Fritz Lang at work. He knew German expressionist cinema. He was very involved with Ivor Montagu and the London Film Society in the mid-20s and had seen the work of Eisenstein. He knew about montage. He'd studied Griffith. You know, home later in his life, he would run the films of Godard and Antonioni. This is somebody who was thinking hard about what he was doing. One of the last things I want to say, I think that Hitchcock, you've been seeing all these images of him here. Another genius thing about him is, although it might be quite off-putting to his naysayers, as is his ability to push our buttons and control us, is his control of what today we use the phrase brand management. By his third film, The Lodger, made in 1926, Hitchcock was famous at a time when few directors were known by name in Britain, and Hitchcock with Chaplin went on to become one of the most easily recognised filmmakers in the world, as you all know. And so how did he control that brand? He was very mindful of the press as his primary audience. There were the cameo appearances in his films, his control over his trailers and the marketing of his films and appearing in the trailers. His decision to move into TV was genius in 1955, 350 episodes of Alfred Hitchcock Presents every Sunday evening on the telly. And of course the famous Silhouette, the signature tune. And maybe this vulgarity, this showmanship has sullied his genius for some people. I mean, you know, goodness knows what he'd be up to today with social media and what he'd be doing on the internet. Anyway, quickly to tell you about the elements of our Genius of Hitchcock program. You'll be having lots of chances to engage with these great films and think for yourself. It's really the biggest project of this kind that we've undertaken. There's a 3-month season here at BFI South Bank, all his surviving films, and the restored British features. We are very excited that we've managed to commission new scores from great musicians that you'll be hearing from in a minute to accompany The Ring, Pleasure Garden, Blackmail, The Lodger. And these films are appearing in special event screenings in really great places that you would associate with Hitchcock, in Wilton's Music Hall and the Hackney Empire, with a fantastic huge screening happening at the Barbican. So, something to look forward to. We're also in negotiations to screen the films across the UK and internationally, but we'll have to come back to you with more information on that. But you might have noticed a logo at the beginning. We have a partnership with the BBC and Arts Council England to stream both The Ring and Champagne live as part of a new online initiative called The Space. There will, of course, be lots of special guests here at screenings. Tippi Hedren is coming, as is Bruce Dern, who was in 2 Hitchcock films. We have Camille Paglia giving a lecture. There will be lots of educational events, introductions, Q&As. There's an exhibition of Hitchcock's Britain, drawing on our collections of papers, designs, posters and stills. We've new collections of films on the shaping of Alfred Hitchcock across the UK and our partner Mediatex. And I think most importantly, really, online, going back to what I was saying about what Hitchcock might have been getting up to today if he had access to online, we are creating a really fantastic resource, I think the richest and best resource on Hitchcock that will exist. And lastly, if you ask my colleagues in the BFI National Library, they'll tell you there are more books, articles, doctoral theses about Hitchcock than any other filmmaker. And you can have feminist, psychoanalytic, close textual analysis, you name it. There's a veritable Hitchcock studies industry. But we at the BFI believe there's room for one more book. And we want to introduce audiences who are new to Hitchcock and to give them really a kind of playful but also profound entry to learning more, enjoying more about his work. And we're using the conceit of the 39 steps to Alfred Hitchcock in this new publication. We have 39 curators, historians, great writers offering insights into the genius of Hitchcock. And this will also be featuring as an online experience. So I do urge you to go to bfi.org.
First of all, I'm going to talk to Neil here. But first of all, before we get into the discussion around these films, we're going to see a clip from Blackmail.
The wonderful thing with Hitchcock is that as soon as you score for him, you've got these giants on whose shoulders you can stand, people like Roger and Herman, and also the kind of the freedom that Hitchcock gives you to say, all right, go behind the action, go into the neurosis that's going on behind it, and bring that out. And that was what I was trying to do with the clip.
Right. And is that's your approach? Was that when you originally wrote the score for this, which was a while ago? Was that the initial pull for you, that scene, or was it another that particularly?
It was, because it's such a massively kind of important moment in the film. Before this, because the murder happens very soon after that, before this scene, we have one world in which everything's fine, everybody's having a lovely time. The girl, Aniondra and her boyfriend are maybe not getting on that well. After the murder, it's as if we're back at year zero. Everything has changed. And I love that idea of a film that starts in offering you something and then changes and gives you something completely different. And that is so much Hitchcock. At no point does he want us on the front foot. And so that sense all the time that you're being surprised, shocked, that, I think, is one of the most beautiful things you can do as a musician, is to try and catch that sense of not knowing. And it's one of the things we will all have found, is at what point do you want to go in front of what the audience knows, what point do you want to stay behind it. It's a party game in a way. It's one of the great things about doing the job.
I'll turn to Nitin. What Neil was saying there about his way into Blackmail, for you, you're doing the lodger at the Barbican. I think really the curious thing here to ask everyone is the aspect of Hitchcock that draws them in to begin with. So what was it for you? Is it similar to Neil, or a different thing altogether?
Well, first of all, being drawn into Hitchcock was something that happened to me when I was a kid. So I've just always been a massive fan of Hitchcock, and particularly Bernard Herrmann's work. But I think really getting into The Lodger, first of all, watching it all the way through as a silent movie is very interesting, because you're finding all the points of psychological empathy, I suppose, with the different characters. And it's interesting what Heather was saying before about how Hitchcock has a technique of actually switching where your empathies lie. With The Lodger, obviously with the protagonist, you're kind of you're constantly switching your allegiances because of the way he kind of plays with your perception of him. And I think that's something you're always kind of left thinking about when you're scoring it. But I suppose my initial response after that is to work on the titles. And then what I do is I pull apart the titles and the different strands of narrative as I go along. So I'm kind of trying to build into the overture a sense of the underlying themes and different points that can converge later on or can actually be elaborated on as the film develops. So it's just looking for all those different aspects, I guess.
Of course, it has the subtitle, A Story of the London Fog.
Yeah.
How foggy is your score?
Probably as much of my brain was most of the time. But no, I kind of think it's interesting because, yes, on the one hand, it's kind of murder, suspense, all the rest of it, but it's also a romance, and it's that's something that you kind of, when I watch Rear Window, it's such a romantic movie. But, obviously the scenes we remember are the scenes of murder and death and kind of suspense. But, ultimately, his work is very romantic as well, and that's something that really comes across in Lodger.
And Daniel, where are you? You're there, sorry, there you are. The Pleasure Garden, Hitchcock's first film.
Yes.
What kind of experience was that for you, thinking about scoring something so, fresh?
Yes. Well, the way I see The Pleasure Garden is, having, as Nitin was saying, I've been a Hitchcock fan my whole life, and I see The Pleasure Garden as a blueprint for all these wonderful films that he went on to make. And as we've been hearing, I think there's the voyeurism and the inventive camera work and the rotating sympathies between the characters, all there almost from the first scene in The Pleasure Garden. One of the things that I was particularly drawn to in The Pleasure Garden, which is something I think it comes back to, is trying to subvert the censorship limitations that were imposed on him. I remember when I first saw Rebecca first, the film, and then read the book. And the twists in the book are far worse than what happens in the film because of all the censorship that was put on him in the film. And so this is something he's had to constantly try and subvert, as I say. And in Psycho, of course, that's the scene that we saw earlier, even there's been some lift of these limitations, but you don't see anything. There's very little you actually see in that scene, and famously you get the sound effect is a knife going into an apple. So that, I think that's all in The Pleasure Garden. That's something that's really appealed to me.
Is there a sound effect aspect to your score?
Yes, there is one. I thought there would be one little amusing sound effect I'm going to put in, but I won't spoil it.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. A little bit of background might be useful here, Robin. What kind of scores did Hitchcock's films have?
Well,
in its silent era?
yeah, as Heather mentioned earlier, we know remarkably little. Hitchcock, given how obsessed he was with composers and kind of really clever use of composers later in his career, there's next to nothing that he's documented about his involvement with the music for these films. What's doubly frustrating is the fact that he made his films for Gainsborough Pictures, his silent films for Gainsborough Pictures and British International Pictures, and we don't have the production records for those companies. So again, we can't find out from those the kind of music that would have happened. What we do know is for the majority of British silent films at that time, the production company would supply cinemas with cue sheets, giving recommended pieces of music that could be then arranged by the in-house arranger conductor and played for a band that could be anything from like a little six-piece right up to full orchestra. So there's probably never a definitive score playing with any of those titles in any case. And the reality is the music was probably pretty derivative. We didn't have the advantage of Russia of having a Shostakovich who was very busy working in the Russian composing for Russian silent films. Elgar was not so busy in the UK doing the same. So it was generally going to be a case of films that were not specially, music that was not specially composed. There's a possibility that we might know a bit more about Blackmail in as much that the score for the sound version of the film was composed by Campbell and Connolly, and it was arranged by Hubert Bath, who became a very well-known British film composer, most famously composing the Cornish Rhapsody for Love Story. And we know he did some arrangements not only for that film, but for the silent version of Blackmail, which oddly came out after the sound version of Blackmail. So I think we can assume that some of the music you'd hear in the sound version was going to be reworked in some way in the silent.
Mira, you have yours is a little way off. In September, you're going to be we're going to be showing Champagne, which is another early Hitchcock, and one of the more fun and bubbly ones in a way.
It is. It's. I love the murder, but I don't have one, unfortunately. So no murder for me. When I first watched the film, the opening scene is really incredible. It's very iconic, and I'd imagine, like me, most people here won't have ever seen this film. This is one of the rarer ones, and it's an amazing scene. Betty Balfour flies in on a seaplane, gets out of her sort of flying gear into a really glamorous frock, and goes on board a big cruise liner, and the entire boat comes out onto the decks to see this woman arrive because she's a celebrity. And that's the key for the whole movie for me, is creating a very contemporary score that makes all the themes of this film, and they're quite different for Hitchcock, which is this idea of a celebrity heiress with a champagne magnate father during the credit crunch, during the Wall Street crash, and it's trying to bring that, all those things that are in that film are obviously incredibly relevant to us at this point, and doing that using electronics and using traditional instruments. But really, there's a lot of party scenes, and I really want the audience to have that sense. When that film was made, it was really modern, and trying to use a score to basically make it feel the same, make it feel fresh.
Yeah, it's got a kind of themes that are quite current in lots of ways.
Yeah, they are incredibly current. And
Celebrity culture.
yeah, it's sort of Tamara Eccleston, come Paris Hilton, Betty Balfour thing, and it's there from, like I said, that first scene. You understand everything immediately.
And Soweto is doing The Ring, Hitchcock's boxing movie, and it's going to be shown at the Hackney Empire, and so it's a kind of Hackney connection there.
Right.
Would you like to tell us what there is in that film?
Yeah, once again, actually, quite similar to Champagne, there are lots of incredibly pertinent and resonant themes in the subtext and overtly within the film. It shows a racially heterogeneous London before the Windrush generation. It has some interesting comments, I think, on what it means to be a man in that time. There's this whole love triangle situation, and a woman who, by quite modern standards, is quite feisty, and she has to, in a clandestine way, I guess, continue this love interest with somebody else. But you can see that she is somebody with her own desires, and it maybe kind of reframe the way I saw imagined relationships were in the 1920s, and I see it through far more modernizing it, realizing that, of course, my grandparents or even great-grandparents' generation must have been far more ribald and racy. The dance sequences, again, I'd point out, that are in this film traveled really well, I think, have traveled really well with time, and there's a particular beat and a tempo that I think I'll be able to twin both the old with the new. It's something that's particularly interesting to me, playing jazz music and playing hip-hop. I constantly get asked, why are you playing this antiquated old art form? And I guess audiences as well as people of his time were aware that jazz music was very cutting edge. The dance music that would have been hearing, the images that would have been seen on the screen were very cutting edge and quite adventurous and daring. And I think a score which is married to that is going to be the challenge.